But I'm sorry, I think that thesis still holds. And I think, is this the moment? Let me ask you the question. The Republican Party is just the MAGA party now, right?
I think so. I felt that way for a while, and there were a few kind of glimmers, and I think Kevin McCarthy was like this fancy, shiny object that a lot of people saw.
Never heard him described that way.
He's handsome, he's charming, he's the #1 Republican fundraiser out there, right? Even in the last quarter, he raised $14 million. He's the Nancy Pelosi of the other side in terms of raising money.
Wow.
In this video, Bill Maher hosts a critical discussion with guests Jessica Tarlov and Scott Galloway, where they unpack what they believe is one of the most pressing internal threats to American democracy, the rise of political extremism under the banner of religious nationalism. The conversation centers on the growing alignment of key GOP leaders with ideologies that seek to blend religious doctrine into state policy, citing Speaker of the House Mike Johnson's appointment as a powerful symbol of this shift. They argue that this movement is not a sudden or violent coup, but rather a slow, calculated restructuring of democratic norms and institutions. At the core of their concern is how loyalty to political figures is beginning to outweigh allegiance to democratic principles. The result is a political climate that encourages rule-bending and discourages accountability, creating an environment where extremist rhetoric is normalized and structural safeguards are weakened from within.
I know everyone is saying, Mike Johnson, my insurance agent? No, the other Mike Johnson. He's the Speaker of the House now. So I've been using this very slow-moving coup about Trump since before he got elected the first time. And a lot of people were laughing. I see a lot of people use it now. And every time we don't completely lose our way of government, somebody says, oh, well, where's your slow-moving coup now? It's slow. That's my answer. It's slow. But what happened this week, I remember I did a very dark editorial like 2022, like the last one of the year after that election, saying, because we all thought the Republicans were going to win, and I said, what's going to happen is that the people who were not in place in 2020, that Trump tried to get his bidding to overturn elections, the John Ratzenbergers of the world, who said, no, I can't find you votes. They're all going to get replaced. And it didn't happen then. But that's kind of happening now with Mike Johnson, the ultimate election denier, and now all the Republicans. It took them 22 days to get this guy. But now they finally got the guy who's Trump's guy. You know, it takes time to get your people to infiltrate them into these positions. But I'm sorry, I think that thesis still holds. And I think, is this the moment? Let me ask you the question. The Republican Party is just the MAGA party.
Maher and his panel highlight how figures like Johnson represent more than just conservative values. They reflect a new brand of politics that openly challenges the separation of church and state, science-based policymaking, and electoral integrity. This gradual erosion of democratic norms, they argue, is wrapped in patriotic language but driven by an authoritarian mindset that sees dissent as dangerous. They point to former President Trump's ongoing influence, not through bold declarations, but through a quiet and steady strategy of placing loyalists in positions of power. These appointments allow for subtle but powerful changes to be made within systems meant to uphold democracy. The real danger, they say, is that such actions slowly redefine what is considered acceptable, dulling public resistance and enabling long-term institutional manipulation without drawing immediate attention.
There were a few kind of glimmers, and I think Kevin McCarthy was like this fancy, shiny object that a lot of people saw.
Never heard him described that way, but...
He's handsome, he's charming, he's the #1 Republican fundraiser out there, right? Even in the last quarter, he raised $14 million. He's the Nancy Pelosi of the other side in terms of raising money.
Wow. I don't, this is a side of him I never thought of.
Well, that's what I'm here to deliver.
I see.
A lot of time in the conservative ecosystem, these are things that I pay attention to.
Right.
Why is this one more useful than this one, for instance? And Kevin McCarthy comes off as someone normal. He is not normal, right? He's someone who had a day where he said, you know, Donald Trump was responsible for January 6th, and the next day he was at Mar-a-Lago throwing back martinis and hanging.
The conversation also scrutinizes Republican leaders like Kevin McCarthy, whose attempts to balance traditional conservatism with Trump-era populism have only deepened the division within the party. According to the panel, This balancing act exposes a broader identity crisis between staying true to long-held political principles or giving in to the loudest faction. McCarthy's strategy of appeasement, while perhaps politically expedient, risks validating extremism by treating it as just another voice in the room. Jessica Tarlov's contributions cut through the noise, highlighting how this trend undermines institutional credibility and further alienates moderate voters. The guests warn that when political leadership becomes more about survival than service, governing becomes secondary to posturing, and the party begins to serve itself rather than the people. This political atmosphere, they argue, is not sustainable in a functioning democracy. Part 4. This is not just about left versus right. It's about the future of democratic governance. Maher's guests emphasize that democracy doesn't only require voting, it requires vigilance. It must be actively maintained, especially when the threats come from within. The panel warns that when laws are manipulated and norms are disregarded under the guise of ideology or religious conviction, the very institutions designed to protect liberty begin to erode. The slow transformation happening now is less about overt authoritarianism and more about reshaping the system to appear democratic while quietly stripping away its safeguards. It's a shift that often goes unnoticed until the consequences are too severe to reverse. Maher closes the conversation with a call for open dialogue and renewed accountability, reminding viewers that the responsibility to uphold democratic values lies with every citizen, not just elected officials.
Sits like this, whatever, and then we get this guy who's a lawyer, who has a long career of going after these kind of social issues. You already mentioned it in the monologue about the sodomy laws, criminalizing homosexuality. He was in the election integrity front. He wasn't just someone who signed on. He was an architect of the plan to get our votes thrown out in Pennsylvania and Georgia and Michigan. Yeah. He is so much more frightening in that sense. But I do think, and obviously want to hear what you guys think about this as well, I think it is a good thing for Democrats that he was made speaker, because everything is laid bare now. If you listen to his interviews, you know exactly who this party is, and Democrats can run against that. It's harder to run against Kevin McCarthy.
Right.